Hello and welcome to another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. I'm Ryan Young, Agri-News Director for 620 CKRM out of Regina. And joining me today is the Chief Agricultural Editor of SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hursh. GX94 Agriculture Director Doug Faulkner is on holidays, but will be joining us again for the next edition of the program. So it's just the two of us, Kevin. And first off, we'll always talk about crop conditions given the time of year. What are things looking like in your area, in the Cabri area in the Southwest?
Well, the Southwest has got a lot of rain over the past month and over the past week, and it's a kind of a novel thing here. It's great to have the rain. It's going to help some of the later seeded crops. People that seeded later are actually going to end up doing very, very well. Usually it's the other way, and the early seeded crops do better. But between rain and in some cases some hail damage, there's a lot of delayed crops. And this is where there's still more harvest progress in the Southwest than anywhere else, but it's slower than the past few years. There's in many areas, and in my particular situation, it'll at least be 2 weeks before I've got anything to go that's available to combine. So it's a little unusual. The grass is green rather than crunchy and brown at this time of year. It's a good feeling to see some rain and feel for the areas of the province that have not been receiving much rain, and much of that's the northern grain belt, the northwest and the northeast. And it makes me wonder, a lot of people are expecting at least an average crop in Saskatchewan, but with the northeast and the northwest been so dry for much of the growing season, and with the early season problems in southwest Saskatchewan, makes me wonder whether there will be an average crop in Saskatchewan, and that August 28th, this estimate from Statistics Canada on production levels will be very interesting to watch. I think southeast Saskatchewan and I think west central Saskatchewan certainly will have very good crops, but in some of the other areas, I wonder whether the crop is as good as some of the observers might be thinking at this point.
Yeah, that was an interesting point in the provincial crop report for this past week. A couple of notable items. One you just mentioned about combines being out in the Southwest, making up less than 1% of harvest progress. I could imagine you've seen farmers harvesting spring wheat and pulse crops, etc. And then the other thing, again, you mentioned was just the fact that it's been really dry, especially in the northern areas where it's basically flipped on its head. Usually you see the northeast and northwest and the eastern part being wet, and then the southwest being really dry. So it's really kind of an interesting trend to see. And around here in Regina, I'll just note as well, crops are looking okay overall from what I can tell. Just a lot of weeds popping up here and there at this point. So not much you can do at this point other than probably spray, but I think most producers would be kind of done at this point.
Yeah, it's a case of as the crop matures and it sits there and you get some rain on top of it, the weeds become more and more prominent. Some of those crops, peas and especially lentils, will be desiccated before harvest in the vast majority of cases with lentils, and that will burn down the weeds, make them a little easier to go through the combine. But in the meantime, looking all that weed growth is not an easy thing to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll continue the topic of grain, more specifically on canola and wheat prices. From what I've noticed this past week, for cash prices anyway, from Bungie out of the Moose Jaw terminal, canola especially, it's been pretty soft. It's kind of hovering around that $610 range a ton. One red spring wheat also kind of being soft as well. And Kevin, I could imagine the futures prices have also been soft as well.
Yeah, just looking at the futures prices the last couple of weeks and looking at November canola futures, over the week, by my reckoning, it's down about $13 a ton, which isn't terrible. It recovered on a couple of days, some of the losses it had. But if you look at the last 2 weeks, over the last 2 weeks, November canola futures are down about $31 a ton. And of course, the futures prices tend to be reflected in the cash prices that producers receive. So we've seen those prices drop off quite considerably compared to where they were a month ago or even a couple of months ago. So not good news. Oftentimes, and a lot of the analysts will say that there's just crop conditions. There's no big problems looming, as harvest approaches, things tend to soften. And we're certainly seeing that in many of the specialty crops. Lentils are pretty soft, especially large green lentils. Pea prices, peas will be coming off quite quickly. Yellow pea prices have been slipping and are soft as well. So it is a bit of seasonality happening with that, but prices for the most part have been going the disappointing direction.
And I understand that you're trying to get a hold of Chuck Penner with Left Field Commodity Research just to kind of get a feel for where prices are going and where they're at.
Yes, and I'm gonna ask Chuck and see if and scout around to see if anybody's done any analysis on with the 100% Chinese tariff on canola oil, canola meal, and peas. How have our trading patterns changed? Have we done any oil and meal business with China? What about their seed purchases? They haven't put any tariffs on seed, although some people believe that could still be coming. Uh, are we selling a fair bit of seed to the Chinese, or are they looking at other markets? A lot of talk about them signing an agreement and taking more canola from Australia, and whether that's actually happening yet or whether that's still in early stages. So, trying to get information out of some market analysis people, and including Chuck Penner, to see if we can get a handle on those issues.
I'll be looking forward to that once Chuck responds to you and hopefully agrees to do an interview with you. And what you mentioned with China, that doesn't really help things, especially with the prices. And what's going on between Canada and the United States isn't really helping those prices either. And I had on the Friday's edition of SaskAg today some comments from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, kind of talking about, the upcoming review of the Canada US Mexico trade agreement, or as some people call it, NAFTA 2.0, and just some concern about Trump maybe not waiting until next year to do the review. He might want to open the books up right now or sooner rather than later. Kevin, what's your take on Doug Ford's comments and just the general sense of where things are going between Canada and the U.S.?
Well, right now, even though it's not mentioned a lot, we Canada actually has a trade advantage in a number of commodities because under CUSMA commodities, which is the majority of what we export to the U.S., they're not covered by the 35% tariff, whereas other countries, by and large, when they're hit with tariffs, it's on all commodities. And in Saskatchewan's case, the numbers I've heard quoted suggest that about 95% of what we export to the US is our CUSMA related items that are not hit with tariffs at this point. And I think Doug Ford's observation and fear that CUSMA could be pulled early and not waiting for the renegotiation time. I think that could be just a signature from President Trump away from happening. It certainly wouldn't be surprising, but that would be a major negative development. Where I disagree with Doug Ford is him thinking we should play hardball with the U.S. That hasn't worked in any other case where any other country has come and tried to ratchet up tariffs or ratchet up pressure on the U.S. That has usually backfired, and I think would probably backfire again. At the present time, I would not support taking a harder line or more retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. Now, if CUSMA is pulled early, then all bets are off, and I think we'll have to reevaluate what we do. But right now, I don't think it's a time to be saber rattling. We could try to talk sensibly, try to continue to work towards trade that works for both sides.
Should that happen, it's going to be interesting to see how Canada handles the review slash negotiations. Bill C-202, that's the private members bill that essentially takes Canada's supply managed sectors like dairy and poultry off of any sort of trade negotiations. And we know that President Trump has hated that sort of thing, even going back to his first time in office many years ago when he first renegotiated NAFTA. What do you think about that, Kevin? Do you think that's going to hinder Canada should this review come into play?
I'm just amazed that politicians of all stripes have supported Bill 202 and keeping supply management off the table. I think that goes out the window if CUSMA has to be renegotiated and if the US is going to play hardball. There's going to have to be some concessions, and there's going to have to be some concessions primarily in the supply managed industries. And I know the dairy industry will scream blue murder over it, but really, in past times when market share has been given up in previous trade agreements, the supply managed industries have been very well compensated for the perceived losses in market share. And I would suggest that their losses have been more perceived than real, but they've still received handsome compensation for it. I would think that that will be the track that this ends up following if I was a betting person.
All right. And sticking on the topic of politics closer to home here, the Saskatchewan NDP, they have come out and spoken against Bartlett Grain Company acquiring Ceres Global Ag Corp for $140 million. Now, the transaction was first announced in May and approved by Ceres shareholders in late June at a special meeting. But the NDP's concern is that they're acquiring Saskatchewan assets, considering that they're an American company based out of Kansas City. And within the context of the ongoing U.S. Canada trade war, the NDP feels that the provincial government isn't really doing anything to protect Saskatchewan assets. Kevin, your take on the particular issue?
I'm surprised by the NDP's reaction. Cirrus Ag, as I understand it, was an international company, and now they've been taken over by a predominantly American company. Those assets are still there. They're still competing in the grain space, particularly their big terminal at Northgate, both fertilizer and grain. So it's still being operated. No, it's not been purchased by a Saskatchewan entity or a Canadian entity. I would suspect that had a Canadian entity been in the running and able to pay as much as Bartlett did, that they would have had a chance at buying it as well. It's not an easy business in the grain business to make margin. So I'm a bit surprised by the NDP thinking that we should get involved and stop American transactions, that somehow this is going to benefit Canada-US relations.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the government's response to their comments. They said something similar about, why should we oppose investment into the province if it's going to bring tax revenue and benefit everybody in the long run? So it's kind of interesting to see. It also kind of reminds me of when Bungie and Viterra were going through their merger process, similar concerns from the NDP.
Yeah, and who else would have been buying Cirrus unless it was Bungie, or I guess potentially could have been Canadian firms such as Parrish and Heimbecker or Patterson Grain or Richardson, or it could have been Cargill, which of course is a very much an international company. So all of those players probably had a look. To have Bartlett Grain, somebody brand new up here, not necessarily a bad thing to have yet another player.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see kind of where that goes moving forward. And in terms of next week, Kevin, what are your plans? Are you just cleaning up around the farm there, just doing some odds and ends, or what are you looking forward to doing for next week?
I'm trying to figure out a electrical issue on my dang blamed combine that I haven't been able to figure out, and uh, waiting for service people to have the time to address it with me. So that and watching crops slowly ripen and cutting grass and doing a few odd jobs, and for the first time might be interested in seeding some winter cereals for forage production for some of the cattle farming neighbors that I cooperate with. So need to get the cedar uh, ready to go too, in the hopes that I can get crop off in time to actually get some winter cereals seeded. Have never done winter cereals before, so new experience for me.
Well, hopefully it works out for you, Kevin.
Thank you muchly.
And as for me for next week, one of the things that I'll be doing is trying to reach out to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to set up a phone interview with Federal Ag Minister Heath McDonald. He's back from his week-long trade mission in the Indo-Pacific region. He visited the Philippines, Singapore, and Indonesia, just kind of exploring more opportunities in those regions, as well as promoting Canadian agricultural products, of course, as Canada continues to diversify its trade portfolio. And on that note, that's going to do it for another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. On behalf of Chief Agricultural Editor Kevin Hursh, I'm Ryan Young saying so long until next time.